In this video, we'll focus on interior angles of triangles and quadrilaterals. We know that triangles are three-sided shapes, but we need to review what quadrilaterals are before we move on. A quadrilateral is a closed figure with four sides and four angles. The figure below is a quadrilateral because it has four sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, and four angles, which is where the two lines meet. We need to cover one last quick concept before we move on to the main part of this lesson. Interior angles are the core concepts of what we're doing today, and what they are the angles that are on the inside of a shape. So if we look at this triangle that I just made, the interior angles of the triangle are here, here, and here. Now we can finally move on to the core concept of the lesson, since we've got our review out of the way and introduced what the main vocabulary is. Our lesson mission is to find the missing angles of a triangle or quadrilateral. The very first thing that you need to know before you can find the missing angle of a triangle or quadrilateral is how many degrees are supposed to be inside of each of those shapes. First, we'll start out with a triangle. You need to start remembering that all triangles contain 180 degrees. That simply means that the sum of the three angles right here, here, and here, the interior angles of a triangle will add up to 180 degrees. So let's say this angle on the left-hand side is 100 degrees. And the angle at the top of that triangle is 30 degrees. We can solve this problem by writing an equation, since we know that 100 plus the 30 degrees at the top plus the unknown angle, which we'll say is n, will add up to 180. So we'll go ahead and add our numbers that we know, which is 100 plus 30, which is 130, plus n equals 180. And you can do this one of two ways. You could solve the equation by isolating the variable, or you could think, what plus 130 gets you to 180? And it's really, you can subtract to figure it out. 180 minus 130, is 50. So n, our missing angle, should be 50 degrees. And we could check that by replacing n with 50. And then we can check 100 plus 30 plus 50 will add up to 180. We're going to do another example just like the last one before we move on to quadrilaterals. But first, if you remember what I have at the top of this screen, your life will be a lot easier when you're trying to find a missing interior angle of a triangle. So, keeping that in mind, let's move on to the next problem. So in this next problem, if you were asked to find the missing angle or the value of y, you might be a little bit confused because you only see one angle measurement, which is 35 degrees. What you need to understand is that anytime you see a square in an angle like this one that I'm highlighting, it means that that angle is 90 degrees. So you might want to make note of that. Then anytime you see a square in an angle, that equals 90 degrees. So we can go ahead and set up our equation like before. We're going to do 35 plus 90 plus y equals 180. And we're going to go ahead and add up the 90 and 35 first, since they are like terms. and we have 125 plus y equals 180. And what you can do is just think, well, if 125 plus something equals 180, we have to do the inverse operation to figure out what y equals. So what we need to do now is to do 180 minus 125 to equal whatever y will equal. And when we do that problem, we get 55. So the missing angle is 55 degrees. After we've done two examples using triangles and finding the missing interior angles of a triangle, we are going to move on to quadrilaterals. So, with the triangles, you learned that all interior angles add up to 180. So we're just going to make note of it. But with quadrilaterals, the sum of their measures of all the angles will be 360. So you really need to understand and remember the difference between a triangle sum of angles and quadrilateral sums of angles are different. Quadrilateral angles, however, will always add up to 360 degrees. So the sum of the interior angles of a quadrilateral will be 360 degrees, while the sum of the interior angles on a triangle will be 180 degrees. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and try a few examples using quadrilaterals. Let's say looking at this quadrilateral, we want to find the measure of the angle Z, which is right here. So you have an angle down here, you have your angle here, and then you have your 60-degree angle here. Now remember, these ones that have the squares inside, they equal 90 degrees each. So this one will be 90 degrees, and this one down here will also be 90 degrees. So we can go ahead and set up an equation the same way we did with triangles, but our sum is just going to be different, and we'll have 4 angles instead of 3. So we'll go ahead and do 90 plus the 90 plus the 60 plus Z will equal 360. And when I add 90 plus 90 plus 60 together, I get 240 plus Z will equal 360. And I could find what Z equals by subtracting 240. And 360 minus 240 is 120 degrees. Now you may have noticed that I did this one a little differently because I subtracted the 240 from both sides by isolating the variable. But really, if you're thinking of 240 plus Z equals 360, you just have to think 240 plus what equals 360, and you can figure that out by subtracting. So when you have a problem like this, you always just solve it by subtracting. Let's go ahead and try one more with another quadrilateral. Let's say we wanted to find the missing angle of this quadrilateral. We would set up our equation the same way, making sure that the sum was equal to 360 degrees. So we would go 105 plus 65 plus 75 plus n equals 360. Because since we have a quadrilateral, we will have 4 numbers that you will be adding up that will equal 360. Now go ahead and add your like terms, which will be your numbers together. So the sum of 105 plus 65 plus 75 should be 245. Then we still have n equals 360. And to find n, we just subtract 245. So we do 360 minus 245 and we will get 115 as our answer. So n should equal 115. And we will go ahead and check that by substituting in 115 for n. So if we checked this on a calculator and added up 105 plus 65 plus 75 plus 115, we will get 360 as our answer, meaning that we were right when we did our equation. We're going to do a quick lesson recap to touch on the key points that we learned in this lesson. The first thing that we reviewed is that a quadrilateral is a figure with 4 sides and 4 angles. Next, an interior angle is an angle on the inside of a figure. The first important part of our lesson that will help us solve for missing angles of triangles is that the sum of the angles in a triangle is and always will be 180 degrees. Finally, we learned the concept that the sum of the interior angles of a quadrilateral will always be 360 degrees, which will help us find the missing angle of a quadrilateral.